You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The smile that stayed behind the engagement night, glittered with wealth, music, and careful appearances. Lila Harrow stood at the center, smiling like someone being watched. A photograph was taken beside a silver frame that caught more than light. Minutes later, she vanished without sound or struggle. Only the image remained, and something inside it did not belong. If you have never attended an engagement party where everyone present was more interested in the alliance than the affection, you have missed one of Manhattan's more polished indecencies. The flowers are chosen like campaign promises. The champagne is poured as if joy were taxable, and the girl at the center of it all smiles with just enough intelligence to know she has been converted into an event. At 10:42 that evening, I was in the office on West 35th Street, pretending to make a dent in correspondence, which is one of the few forms of labor Wolfe will delegate to me, with confidence and without gratitude. He was upstairs in the plant rooms, with the orchids, where he keeps his truest social commitments, and Fritz was in the kitchen supervising the fate of a duck with the moral gravity of a bishop handling doctrine. The house had settled into that blessed interval between dinner and nuisance. Then a telephone rang. He answered, because if I left telephones to Wolfe, we would lose clients, and if I left them to Fritz, he would murder civilization for interrupting source. Office of Nero Wolfe, Archie Goodwin speaking. A woman's voice said, I must speak with Mr. Wolfe at once. That happens often enough to mean little by itself, I said. That depends. Are you the police, the victim, or a rich relative? There was a pause. Then she said, very level, at the moment I am the aunt of a missing bride. That improved the line at once. What bride? My niece, Lila Harrow. There was an engagement announcement at our house this evening. She was photographed in the east drawing room at 11 minutes after 10. By 20 past, she was gone. Gone where? If I knew that I would not be telephoning Nero Wolfe. That was fair and better than most callers manage under stress. I asked. Any note? Number, any witness to her leaving. Number, any sound quarrel or collapsed suitor. Number that was getting interesting. What is your name? Celia Brent. The house is the Harrow residence on East 64th Street. Inspector Kramer is already here, but he is treating this as if my niece had merely gone upstairs to sulk. She has not. Mr. Wolfe must send someone at once. I covered the mouthpiece and turned toward the door to the hall. Wolfe, no answer. Orchids outrank panic for the first call. I raised it. Wolfe bride gone, Kramer present, and the aunt sounds expensive. That did it. A moment later I heard the heavy, measured descent that has always reminded me of a wise glacier, reluctantly agreeing to move downhill. Wolfe came in through the doorway, broad, exact, and displeased in the abstract before learning whether the particular instance deserved it. What? He said. Celia Brent. Niece named Lila Harrow disappeared from an engagement party, photograph taken. Minutes later the girl gone. Kramer there, no note. Wolfe held out his hand for the receiver. I gave it to him. This is Nero Wolfe, he said. Speak, concisely. He listened without comment for nearly a minute, which from Wolfe counts as generous. Then he said, was she reluctant to marry? Listened. Did she receive any communication recently that disturbed her? Listened again. What? His eyes shifted, not toward me but inward. You are certain? Another silence. Then, yes, my assistant will come. He handed me back the phone and went to his desk. Well? I asked. He lowered himself into the chair and placed his fingertips together. Miss Harrow was standing beside an old, silver-framed family portrait. When the photograph was taken, Mrs. Brent says that when the print was developed something appeared in the reflected surface of the frame which had not been noticed at the time. She would not describe it further by telephone. Which is wise. You will go. That was my prediction. Yes, your predictions are occasionally useful, put on a necktie that does not embarrass me. I went upstairs, changed, and came down to find Fritz in the hall, with my coat over one arm, and a look on his face that suggested the city ought to arrange its crimes around better hours. "More supper will be required later," he said. "That sounds hopeful." "It is administrative." He handed me the coat. "Do not return with journalists. I'll try to keep the cab free of them." He looked toward the office door, where Wolf could hear every syllable and would deny it if asked. "If there is gunplay, let it happen somewhere with inferior rugs." Outside, the city had that washed steel look New York wears in spring, when the rain has ended, but the pavement keeps remembering. On the ride uptown, I thought about a bride disappearing between a flashbulb and a toast. Rich houses produce absences differently from ordinary ones. In smaller places, a missing woman makes noise at once. In a house with 4 drawing rooms, 2 stairs, a terrace, and enough servants to support a theater company, silence may not be noticed until it has had time to settle and become expensive. The Harrow house was limestone, broad, fronted, and self-satisfied, which is the usual architecture of old money that has survived long enough to think it deserves congratulations. There were 2 police cars outside and 3 chauffeurs pretending not to watch. Inside, the front hall held flowers, cigarette smoke, perfume, and the first bruised air of a party that has just learned it may become news. Inspector Kramer was under the stair, red-faced and squared, talking to a man in evening clothes, whose silver hair had been arranged by nature to suggest trusteeship and disapproval. Kramer saw me, broke off, and gave me the stare he reserves for tax increases and private investigators. "What are you doing here?" "We're representing the higher culture." "You can represent it out on the sidewalk." "I would, but the clues are usually kept indoors." He made a sound in his throat and turned half away, which from him is nearly hospitality. The silver-haired man stepped forward. "You are Mr. Goodwin?" "Yes. I'm Adrian Harrow, Lila's uncle. Pleased under protest." He did not smile. Good. Men who smile too early in such houses usually turn out to be lawyers or worse. Celia Brent came down the staircase then, and I knew the voice at once. Around 50, handsome in the disciplined way, dark dress, pearls, and enough control in the mouth to run a boarding school or a Senate committee. She came directly to me. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes." Mr. Wolf should have come himself. He believes in delegation the way other men believe in prayer. "This is no time for jokes." "No," I said, "but it is time for speed. Show me the photograph." That pleased her better than sympathy would have. She took me to the east drawing room. It was large, white, paneled, and arranged so that every object had either inherited importance or had been bought to imitate it. At the far side stood the silver frame in question, not a mirror, as I had first imagined, but a large silver-framed portrait under glass. One of those ancestral relics families keep because they would rather inherit a face than a conscience. Beside it, on a side table, lay the fresh photograph in a folder. I opened it. There they were. Lila Harrow and the intended groom at center. Lila in pale satin, dark, haired, fine, boned, and smiling with too much precision for comfort. The groom broad, shouldered, clean and satisfied. Adrian Harrow and Celia Brent behind, several guests drifting in the background, and in the reflected glass of the silver-framed portrait, near the edge where no one in the room had apparently thought to look, stood a woman, not a blur, not a photographic mistake. A woman in dark clothing and a narrow hat, still and exact, her face partly turned, her eyes, so far as the angle preserved them, fixed not on the room, but on Lila Harrow. Celia Brent said, "You see it?" "Yes." No one noticed her at the time. That is either stupidity or design. In rich rooms, it's often both. She did not enjoy that. Who took the photograph? A man named Roscoe Bell. He is in the library with Inspector Kramer's man. Who first noticed the reflected woman? I did. The photograph was developed in a temporary darkroom downstairs. Bell brought up the first print. I looked at it and saw her. You know who she is. Number that answer was either true or practiced. I left it for later. Who last saw Lila before she disappeared? Several people in fragments. Peter Darnell spoke with her. Mrs. Van Alstyne claims Lila crossed toward the morning room. Nora Kent, her friend, says they exchanged a few words after the photograph, but by 10:20 she could not be found. Any exits watched? The front entrance. Yes, the terrace doors were shut. The house was searched at once. Servants' stairs. Of course. Of course in such houses often means not at all. I kept that to myself. I wanted the photographer next, but before leaving the room, I went to the silver frame itself. The angle told a neat story. The reflected woman had not merely drifted into view. She had stood exactly where the camera and the glass would preserve her, while keeping her out of the main field. That takes either luck of a rare breed or deliberate placement. I do not believe in the first, if the second can be charged admission. Roscoe Bell was in the library with Stebbins, who looked relieved to see me because he has known me long enough to understand that I am easier to answer than Kramer and no less dangerous to the false. Bell was a quick, careful man with good cuffs and bad nerves. You took 2 plates? Yes, sir. I mean yes. Stop sirring me. It weakens evidence. Did you see the woman? He frowned. Not at the time, only in the print. Where did you stand? He showed me. I put him back there later and saw at once what I had suspected. The reflected woman had occupied the only position in that portion of the room where she could be caught in the silvered glass without becoming directly noticeable to most of the guests. That was enough to make the back of my neck behave attentively. I asked him, "Did Miss Harrow react before the exposure?" He thought. She looked left for an instant. Not startled, more like she recognized someone unexpectedly. There it was, that mattered more than the groom, the pearls, or the flowers. Back in the front hall, Kramer intercepted me. Well, she was there. Who? The reflected woman. He swore at the chandelier, me and probably photography in general. You got anything useful? Yes, I said. The woman in the glass did not wander into the picture. She stood where she meant to be seen. Kramer glared. Wolf told you that already? Number, I'm still capable of feeding myself. He grunted and moved off, which from Kramer means either contempt or respect, trying hard not to be caught. I was leaving when I saw Nora Kent at the foot of the back stair, smoking as if she owed it money. Mid-20s, dark-eyed, intelligent and tired already. She had the face of a woman who had spent the evening noticing what everyone else preferred to call atmosphere. You're Lila's friend, I said. Yes. Were you near her after the photograph? Yes. Did she seem frightened? Nora looked at me for one full second, measuring cost against use. No, she said. Not frightened. What then? She drew on the cigarette and let the smoke out slowly. Back at the brownstone, he was where I had left him, in the office with the lamp low, the chair immovable, and his face arranged for information. I gave him the evening in order: the silver frame, the reflected woman, Bell's account, Adrian Harrow's stone face, Celia Brent's control, Kramer's charm, and Nora Kent's single useful word. When I finished, Wolf shut his eyes. At last, he said, a fact. That's unkind to society. Society deserves less. He opened his eyes again. The woman in the reflection wished to be preserved. Not admitted, preserved. That is significant. Also, Miss Harrow was not frightened, but resolved. Therefore, the disappearance was not a random seizure, and probably not an abduction in the common melodramatic sense. Something had already begun before the photograph. That was my thought. Yes, which is why I permit your salary. He reached for the photograph again. Tomorrow, Archie, you will learn who among that collection of upholstered liabilities opposed the engagement, whether Miss Harrow had been receiving any communication before this evening, and why a woman would choose reflection instead of entrance. Also, find out what Harrow House conceals. Old houses of that type are built for elegance and escape in equal proportion. That last point struck me as right enough to be annoying. Upstairs later, standing by my window, while the street below shone like wet slate under the lamps. I thought about the woman in the glass. She had not wanted admission to the party. She had wanted a record. She had arranged herself in reflected light the way another woman might arrange flowers on a piano, carefully, knowingly, for later effect. Lila Harrow had vanished minutes afterward without noise, struggle, or farewell, but the image had stayed behind, and the image, unlike the guests, was not trying to be tactful. Chapter 2. The reflection. No one claimed when the photograph was developed. The room grew quieter than it should. A woman appeared in the silver frame's reflection behind Lila. No guest remembered her. No servant saw her enter or leave. I saw intention where the others saw mystery. The woman had stood there on purpose. If there is one thing society hates more than scandal, it is evidence with timing. By 11:30, the Harrow drawing room had done what all rich rooms do when trouble enters and refuses to remove its shoes. It had become cautious. The flowers were still costly, the silver still bright, the lamp still shaded to improve both skin and bad judgment, but the talk had gone from celebration to self-defense. Men spoke in undertones as if volume itself might become testimony. Women stood too straight. The servants moved with that special discretion that says they know more than the family and intend to live longer. The photograph lay on a side table near the silver, framed ancestral portrait, and everyone in the room had begun walking around it emotionally without going near it physically. That was sensible. Objects improve once people stop explaining them. Celia Brent stood beside me and looked at the print as though the paper had personally insulted generations. "You see what I mean?" "Yes." No one noticed her. "That," I said, "depends on what you mean by noticed." She turned to me, and if she had been carrying anything heavier than pearls, I might have had to dodge. "I mean that no one saw a strange woman standing in my drawing room behind my niece." "That is not the same thing." "What is the same thing, Mr. Goodwin?" "That no one thought to look where she intended to survive." She did not like that because it was right, and because she had spent years in a house where control was expressed through arrangement. It is annoying to discover someone else has arranged your room better than you have. I took the photograph closer to the lamp. Lila Harrow stood there in pale silk with Edwin Vale at her side, smiling with the exact degree of warmth a woman gives when the room has decided she is decorative capital. Edwin had one hand half turned toward her in the approved fiancée manner, not touching but near enough to suggest legal optimism. Adrian Harrow and Celia Brent were just behind, and 2 or 3 other guests occupied the farther field. The silver-framed portrait to one side reflected a broken version of the room, and there, in that fragment of silvered glass, stood the woman. She was not blurred. That was the first useful thing. She was partly obscured by angle and reflection, yes, but her presence had edges. A dark dress or suit, a narrow hat, head turned not toward the camera, not toward the guests, but toward Lila. No smile, no drift in the posture. She might have been carved there, a ghost, if ghosts wore intention, I said, who first saw her. Celia answered at once. "I did." Belle brought up the first developed print. I took it, looked at it, and there she was. Did anyone else identify her? Numbered, did anyone try? That got me a look. "Mr. Goodwin, this house is not a railway platform. Unknown women do not materialize in drawing rooms and go unaccounted for." "That's encouraging. It means either the house is lying or the woman was clever," Celia Brent said. "Are you always impertinent?" "Yes, it saves time." I asked for the photographer. Roscoe Bell was in the library with Inspector Kramer and Sergeant Stebbins. Bell had the face of a man who had expected to spend the evening flattering cheekbones, and was now learning that a camera may become witness without consulting the operator. He was in evening clothes too new for comfort, and wore them with the humility of a tradesman working among old names. Kramer looked at me and made a sound that would have improved with subtitles. "What are you doing now?" "Talking to your cameraman. He's my witness." "He's society's witness. You're only borrowing him." That got me nowhere with Kramer, which is one of the steadier laws of nature. I said to Bell, "Show me where you stood." We went back to the east drawing room. He indicated a point near the arch between the music room and the drawing room proper. The silver, framed portrait had been angled slightly toward the center of the room. I put Bell where he had been, then moved around until I found the line that matched the image. At once the thing sharpened. The reflected woman had not wandered into the picture. She had occupied the one place in that portion of the room where the glass would catch her without forcing the surrounding guests to notice her directly. 2 feet forward, and she would have been in clear sight. 2 feet back, and the frame would have shown only drapery and flowers. At the place she chose, she existed only for the camera, and afterward, for anyone patient enough to distrust the obvious. That is not luck. That is choreography, I said. Take me through the moment. Bell did. He had arranged the group. Lila at center, Edwin at her right, aunt and uncle behind. Then a pause while someone in the back shifted. Bell had told them to hold. During that pause, Lila glanced once to her left. Not sharply, not in alarm, but as though a private signal had just been answered. Then she smiled again. Bell took one plate, adjusted a fraction, took another, and the thing was done. Did you see the woman then? Number Agnon near that wall, he thought. People were moving, but not there, I think. No one directly there. Then she stepped in only at the right second. He swallowed. It seemed so. Celia Brent had followed us in and was listening as if she disliked every word but did not dare interrupt for fear of missing the worst one. I asked. Who moved the silver portrait? She answered. I did, or rather I had it moved. Why? Because it belonged there. That's decorative, not explanatory. Her chin lifted. Because the room wanted balance. The flowers on the opposite side were too heavy. The portrait gave weight. Weight with reflective properties. She looked at me sharply. Are you implying I staged this? Number, I'm implying you helped the woman without knowing it. That landed. I turned to Henry. The second footman, who had been stationed at the entrance with a tray, and who looked as if he had already spent the last hour wishing he had been born into accounting. He was young and neat and exact in the way only very good servants and very good criminals are exact. Did you see a woman near the silver frame? His eyes moved toward Mrs. Brent before coming back to me. That told me enough to go on with. Yes, sir, maybe. Maybe is a coward's answer. Improve it. He flushed. I saw someone dark there, just for a second. I thought she belonged. Did she come through the main door? No, sir. Not that I saw. Did she leave by the main door? No, sir. Did she speak? No, sir. Then how did she belong? He hesitated, and because I wanted the truth more than comfort, I waited him through it. She stood like someone who knew where to stand. That was the first completely honest sentence anyone in the house had given me. I said, yes, exactly. Celia Brent sat down then, not because she was weak, but because the room had finally become heavier than posture. I left Henry to his tray and crossed to the wall beside the silver portrait. The paneling there was old, dark, and expensive enough to resent fingerprints. At first glance it was only paneling. At second, there was a seam too straight to be accidental. Not much. Just enough. I ran a finger over the carved edge and found a brass touch, point worn nearly invisible by use and polish. I pressed it. The panel gave inward 1/2 inch. That changed the room at once. Celia Brent stood up too quickly. Mr. Goodwin, do rich houses on 68th Street often grow doors after midnight? It is an old service passage. Of course it is. That from her tone should have explained everything. Old houses built by men with too much money and too little trust often contain parallel geographies, public stairs, private stairs, servant halls, family routes, passages for avoiding guests, passages for avoiding family, and passages intended originally for coal or linen and later adopted for scandal. I opened the panel fully. Behind it was a narrow corridor, dim, carpeted, and exactly the kind of path a woman could take from invisibility to reflection and back again without asking a single person's permission. Kramer came in behind me at that point and exploded with enough sound to prove he had not yet appreciated the irony of the silences in this case. "What the hell is that?" "A house," I said, trying to be useful. He elbowed past, took one look into the corridor, and swore at architecture. Stebbins looked interested, which is one reason I have always preferred him, I said. Now the reflected woman's route improves. She does not enter like a guest. She steps from concealment to the one precise point where the camera will preserve her. Then back again, Kremer grunted. "You think she knew the house?" "Number, I know she knew the house, or knew someone who did." That was the second useful thing the photograph had given us. The first was that the woman had wanted to be recorded. The second was that she had known exactly how to do it. A random intruder in a crowded room leaves confusion. A woman who appears only in reflection leaves a message. She had not come to attend the engagement. She had come to exist in the record of it. That distinction mattered. I asked Adrian Harrow, who had rejoined us and looked as if the house itself had just betrayed him socially. "Who knew about this passage?" he said. "Family, senior staff, Lila, of course. Widwin Vale, not to my knowledge." That phrase is always so hopeful. He did not appreciate it. I took the photograph with me back to the brownstone because Wolf wanted it more than Kremer wanted to object, and Kremer knew from experience that fighting me over paper only makes me cheerful. By then the rain had started again, soft enough to sound sentimental and cold enough to lie about it. Wolf was in the office, naturally, with one lamp on, a book open, and his beer untouched, because he had reached the stage of curiosity where appetite narrows. I laid the photograph on his desk and gave him the new arrangement. The exact position, the line of reflection, the hidden panel, Henry's statement, Belle's timing, Lila's glance, and the impossible fact that the woman had appeared only where the camera could keep her. When I finished, Wolf shut the book. "At last," he said, "the object has become honest. That's unkind to silver. True silver is vain. Glass is occasionally useful." She wanted selective notice. She required a second look. That is very different. Explain. People who wish to threaten openly choose doors and voices. People who wish to accuse choose witnesses. People who wish to correct the record choose reflection. That was good enough to keep. He tapped the frame in the print. She stood there to be seen later by the person capable of interpreting the image. Perhaps by Miss Harrow, if she examined it. Perhaps by the family. Perhaps by us. In any case, her appearance was intentional, not social. That was my hymn. Yes, try not to sing it. He leaned back. "Tomorrow, Archie, you will learn who among the family and staff knew the passages, who among them had reason to bring an old ghost into this room, and why Miss Harrow looked left before the exposure. If she recognized the woman, then the disappearance began before she ever left the room. Later, at my window with the city below glistening under lamps and rain, I thought again about the silver frame. In rich houses, there is always one object too many, a portrait, a box, a sideboard, a vase, that exists less as furniture than as memory under polish. This one had been moved for effect, and had taken effect farther than intended. It had remembered what the room pretended not to know. The woman in the reflection had not wanted entrance. She had wanted proof. And proof, unlike gossip, does not mind waiting for someone clever enough to look twice. Chapter 3. The bride who noticed first witnesses recalled Lila behaving differently before she disappeared. She had paused, distracted, staring toward the silver frame. Her friend, Nora, spoke of Lila mentioning someone returning. It wasn't fear that crossed her face. It was recognition. The disappearance had begun before she left the room. By noon the next day, I had interviewed enough people at Harrow House to satisfy a census bureau and disappoint a court. Society witnesses are decorative by habit. They remember the wrong cufflinks, the right champagne, the woman who should not have worn green, and the exact degree of vulgarity in a string quartet before they recall that a bride disappeared under their noses. It is one of the city's more expensive defects. Wolf had sent me back uptown with one direction sharp enough to survive his impatience. Archie, the moment before. That sounds theatrical. It is chronological, Miss Harrow, did not vanish by magic. Something altered in her before she crossed the room. Find it. That's what I'm paid for. No, Wolf said. You are paid for returning with it. That is him. He can take a simple task and give it manners severe enough to leave a mark. So I went after the moment before. Harrow House by daylight had begun to resemble one of those women who maintain dignity by refusing to admit fatigue exists. The flowers were fresher than the people, the servants quieter, the family more careful. Somewhere upstairs a maid was probably folding. Last night's satin and wondering whether scandal spots come out in cold water. Stebbins let me in and said, Kramer wants Wolf, then he'll have to improve. He said that too, only louder. I found Nora Kent in the morning room with a cigarette, a cup of coffee gone cold, and the expression of a woman who had not slept because memory had been making revisions all night. She was Lila's closest friend, which is always useful. Friends see the seams in a smile sooner than family does, because family has too much capital invested in not looking. Nora, Mr. Goodwin, you remembered something. Her mouth moved a little. I remembered several things, then I started deciding which of them would do the least damage. That is generous of you, and no help at all. She gave a short laugh with no gaiety in it. Sit down then. I did. Nora was one of those women who make intelligence look easier than it is. Dark hair, clear skin, good eyes, and no waste in the way she handled a sentence. Not rich enough to be foolish on principle, not poor enough to be romantic about wealth. A useful witness if she decided honesty was worth the inconvenience. You said last night that Lila did not look frightened, I told her. Only resolved. Yes. I want the 10 minutes before the photograph, not the whole party. Only the part where she changed. That got me the first real look she'd given me. You talk like Wolf. Number, I talk like myself. I only returned the bill to him. She lit another cigarette before answering, which meant the truth was somewhere near enough to burn. She had been wrong all evening, Nora said. Not badly wrong. Lila knew how to behave in rooms like that. But she kept pausing as if she were listening for something underneath the talk. Listening to what? I didn't know then. And now I think she was waiting. That was better. For whom? Nora flicked ash into a tray shaped like a swan, which told me the Harrows had both money and taste problems. She didn't say, but twice, maybe 3 times, she stopped in the middle of a sentence and looked toward the east wall. Not at the guests, not at the flowers, toward that silver frame. The hidden panel. Yes. That improved the house and worsened the family, I asked. Did she mention anyone? Nora took a breath. Once, just once, say it, say it. She leaned toward me before the photograph, when Belle was still arranging people, and said, I thought if she ever returned, it would be meaner than this. That sat with us for a second. Exact words, I asked. As exact as I can make them. She, yes. And you asked, who? Of course I asked who. Nora looked tired enough to be honest. Lila shook her head and said, Don't spoil it by rescuing me too soon. I wrote that down at once. Some sentences deserve immediate preservation before tact gets ideas. She didn't seem afraid. Number, that's what was wrong with it. If she had been afraid, I would have dragged her upstairs and locked the door and let the engagement rot where it sat. But it wasn't fear. It was recognition with something behind it. Relief maybe, or surrender. I still can't tell. That matched what little I already had and improved it in all the wrong ways. Tell me about the pause, I said. The exact one before the photograph. Nora looked at the window as if she could see last night reflected in the glass. Belle had them arranged, she said. Lila at center, Edwin beside her, Celia and Adrian behind. People were settling. Belle said something about holding still, and then Lila, just for a second, looked past me, past the frame, to the left. Her face changed. How? Nora answered at once. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. There it was, clean and plain. I prefer witnesses who know the difference between alarm and memory. She saw the woman, I said, and knew her. Yes. Did you see the woman yourself then? Number only later in the print. But Lila saw her before the camera did. That was the hinge. The disappearance had not begun when Lila crossed the room. It had begun when she looked toward the silver frame and found confirmation standing where only she, or someone taking a second look later, could catch it. I pressed. Had Lila said anything before last night about someone returning? Nora hesitated. Not because she was inventing, but because she was deciding how much of Lila's life she could permit me to take apart in one sitting. Yes, she said. Twice in the last month, never with a name. Once she said there are some people who don't come back in person first. They return in rooms. I told her that was theatrical, and she said old houses make dramatists of women who would rather be dull. That sounded like Lila. Better. It sounded like a woman educated by her own family's architecture. And the second time, she asked me whether I believed a person could be removed from a house and still know more about it than the people who inherited it. I nodded. Evelyn March, or someone like her. Someone who knew the passages, the old injuries, the unseen doors, and the exact angle from which a silver frame might be made to testify. I asked Nora, did Lila want the engagement? That got me a look so level it ought to have been taxed. She wanted peace, Nora said. Edwin offered form. In houses like this, the two are often mistaken for each other. That was good enough that I almost forgave her the delay. Did she love him? Nora gave me the short answer. Not in the useful sense. I let that stand from. Nora, I went to Edwin Vale because it is always entertaining to compare a friend's truth with a fianc phase version. I found him in the library, where rich men retreat when they want to appear grave without risking sincerity in a public room. He was by the mantel again, too well composed for my taste, which remained unimproved by him. Mr. Goodwin. Yes. You've spoken to Nora. That saves time. She exaggerates emotion. Number, she notices it. That's harder. He didn't like that, so I continued. Lila saw someone before the photograph. He held still, which with men like Edwin is the nearest thing to a recoil. Perhaps, not perhaps. She looked directly toward the frame and changed. He said nothing. I asked, did she say anything to you after that? This time the pause was longer. Yes. What? She said. If I leave this room, don't follow immediately. That was new, and good enough that I said it back to him. Don't follow immediately. Yes. And what did you say? That she was tired, and if she needed a minute alone, I would manage the room. I stared at him. You actually said that? Yes. That was Edwin all over. Not curious, not alarmed, merely administrative. Did it occur to you, I asked, that a woman about to vanish from her engagement might deserve a better question than whether you could manage the room? His jaw moved once. I did not think she was about to vanish. No, I said. That is becoming your strongest contribution. He turned away. She was calm. Yes, resolved. That's different. Perhaps to you. No, I told him. To anyone who isn't in love with outcomes. That one landed, and I was glad of it. He looked back. What do you think happened? At the moment, I think the disappearance had begun before she left the room. That got him. What does that mean? It means she recognized the woman in the reflection, understood what it meant, and acted accordingly. She didn't stumble into mystery, Mr. Vale. She answered it. He had no reply worth having. Celia Brent was next, because aunts always claim later that they saw something wrong, but were too tactful to disturb the china. She received me in the blue sitting room and gave me exactly that. I thought she looked pale. Everyone looked pale, I said. The lighting was criminal. She was quieter than usual. That still leaves half New York. Celia Brent's mouth tightened. She stared toward the frame before the photograph, only once. I assumed she had seen one of the maids out of place. No, she admitted. I see that now. Did you know of anyone who might return? That put color into her face. Not much. Just enough to prove an old name had reached the blood before the mouth could arrange itself. I know of several people who ought not. That is family language. I'd like English. She folded her hands. There was once a young woman attached to this house under circumstances untidy enough to survive discretion. She left years ago. My sister believed the matter ended. Did Lila? Celia Brent gave me the dry answer. Lila was old enough to know that houses do not forget because relatives do. Good. That made 3 people who understood it. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the city had gone grey and damp again, which in New York passes for moral weather. Wolf was in the office with beer on his desk, and impatience arranged around him like a second piece of furniture. Well, I gave it to him in order. Nora Kent's account of Lila pausing, listening, waiting. The line about if she ever returned. The instruction not to rescue her too soon. The friend's certainty that the expression on Lila's face had been recognition, not fear. Edwin Vale's belated admission that Lila told him not to follow immediately if she left the room. Celia Brent's acknowledgement that the old woman from the house, or the old scandal attached to her, had not in fact been dead enough to remain decorative. When I finished, Wolf nodded once. Yes, you're settling into that. Number, you are improving. That from him is almost enough to make a man reckless. He leaned back. The disappearance began before Miss Harrow moved. Recognition preceded departure. Therefore the action in the room was not sudden but conclusive. The woman in the reflection did not cause surprise. She confirmed expectation. That's my reading. Yes, also, Edwin Vale is a fool. Good, we're agreed. Not merely emotionally, Wolf said. Structurally. Miss Harrow tells him not to follow, and he obeys because he values propriety above comprehension. Such men are frequently innocent of dramatic acts and almost always guilty of making them easier. That's the best thing you've said about him. Number, it is the kindest. He closed his eyes for a moment. Now find the returning woman's history in that house. Miss Harrow recognized not a face alone but a claim. We need its content. Latter, standing at my window with the wet street below, keeping its usual appointments with headlights and rain. I thought again about that instant before the photograph. A bride in silk, a room full of witnesses, a camera waiting, and then one look toward the silver frame that changed everything. Not because she saw danger, because she saw confirmation. The disappearance had not begun in the morning room, or in the hidden passage, or in the night outside. It had begun the moment Lila Harrow noticed first. Chapter 4. The House with Hidden Ways. Harrow House was elegant on the surface and secretive beneath it. Hidden corridors allowed movement without being seen. The reflection placed the woman near one such concealed passage. Only someone familiar with the house could stand there so easily. This was not an intruder. It was someone who knew where to go. If a rich house lives long enough, it develops 2 histories. One is the kind engraved in invitations, real estate columns, and family anecdotes told over coffee with too much silver on the tray. The other is the history of roots. Who goes where without being seen, which stair belongs to service and which to blood, where doors pretend to be paneling, and how long a person may stand in a hidden passage before becoming part of the woodwork. By noon I had begun to suspect Harrow House had been built less for comfort than for controlled disappearance. Wolf had sent me back uptown with one instruction improved by contempt. Archie, the house. That narrows it. Number, it civilizes it. An old house does not merely contain conduct. It trains it. Learn what this one teaches. That sounds architectural. It is moral, Wolf said, which is worse. So I went to learn the morals of limestone. The Harrow place stood on East 64th, with that composed old money face, which says, as plainly as carved stone can say anything, that vulgarity is what happens on the sidewalk to other people. By then the press had not yet fully arrived, which meant Kramer was still winning. One patrolman stood at the curb pretending to be scenery. Inside, the front hall was quieter than yesterday, and therefore more informative. Panic makes noise. Calculation lowers its voice. Stebbins was under the stair with a notebook and a disposition improved by my not being Inspector Kramer. Morning, I said. It was, he said, till 3 different relatives remembered 3 different things and all of them wanted priority. That's family. He nodded toward the east wing. You'll want Mrs. Pell. Always housekeepers know where the bodies would go if the family had courage. That got the faintest improvement in his face. Mrs. Pell was in the morning room directing Flowers into retreat. She was a broad, composed woman with silver hair, strong wrists, and the expression of someone who had spent 30 years rescuing good furniture from bad blood. If Harrow House had a practical conscience, it probably wore her shoes. Mr. Goodwin, Mrs. Pell. You've come to poke at the walls. That's one version. I prefer inquire into the architecture. She did not smile, which made her more trustworthy. I began plainly. There is a concealed passage opening near the silver frame in the east drawing room. Yes, you knew of it. Yes. Who else? Family senior staff. Anyone raised in the house and not entirely ornamental. That excludes some useful people. It usually does. She said it dryly, and I liked her at once. I had her show me. The panel beside the silver, framed ancestral photograph opened inward from a brass pressure point, disguised in the carving. Behind it ran a narrow corridor, carpeted in old runner and dimmed by 2 wall bulbs with parchment shades, both of them too low to flatter and too steady to surprise. The passage led behind the east drawing room wall, bent at a right angle, and joined a service corridor halfway between the morning room and the back stair. Another concealed panel opened from that corridor into the little card room. A second, farther down, opened into the library alcove. There was also a narrow stair going up to a dressing room suite, no longer used except at Christmas when nephews overflowed. Charming, I said. A whole domestic underworld. It was practical, Mrs. Pell said. Meals, linens, musicians, children, families of this age preferred convenience not to show itself. Convenience, I said, is one of my favorite words. It excuses almost everything. She accepted that without comment, which again improved her. The passage told its own story. A person could leave the east drawing room through the panel, cross to the back corridor, and be halfway up the rear stair or out toward the side terrace door without touching the main hall. A servant could move between reception rooms without becoming part of the occasion. A family member could avoid a bore, a creditor, or a fiancé, or a woman seen only in reflection could step out from concealment, long enough to be caught in the silvered glass, and then be gone before anyone in the room finished admiring the central pair. That was the point. The house had not merely permitted mystery, it had contributed staging. I had Mrs. Pell stand where the reflected woman would have stood. Then I returned to Roscoe Bell's camera position. There it was again, exact as arithmetic, in the room proper. From that angle, a person at the panel edge would be half blocked by the silver frame and floral arrangement. In reflection, she would appear clear enough to disturb posterity. It was almost indecently neat, I said. She knew where to stand. Yes, Mrs. Pell said. Not, perhaps. Not, I suppose. Just yes, I turned. You've thought so since the first print. I have run this house too long to mistake accident for breeding, she said. That woman did not drift there. That was one of the better sentences I'd heard in a week. Then who knew the passage well enough? Miss Lila, Mrs. Brent, Mr. Adrian, myself, the late Mrs. Harrow knew every hidden turn in the place and enjoyed them too much, some older servants. And she stopped. And a girl raised partly in the house years ago, not family, but near enough to know its habits. Evelyn March. She did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. Yes, she said. There it was. The name had been circling the case, like a hawk, too polite to land, while company was present. Now it had perched. Tell me, I said. Mrs. Pell looked down the passage as if expecting old dust to object. Her mother worked here, seamstress at first, then companion in a loose sort of way to Mrs. Harrow's sister for one winter. The child, Evelyn, ran everywhere. She knew the service halls, the nursery stair, the music room panels, all of it. She had that kind of memory. Nothing in a house escaped her if it moved twice. And then she left. That's social language, try a verb. Mrs. Pell's mouth tightened. She was removed, that sharpened it. For what? For being too visible in the wrong ways. She glanced at me. Do not force me into melodrama, Mr. Goodwin. The facts are already indecent enough. I let that stand because it had truth in it, and because she had already given me more than most families allow themselves at breakfast. He wanted Adrian Harrow next. He received me in the library with the patience of a man who had inherited too much furniture and not enough happiness. Tall, silver-haired, exact in movement, not handsome, but of the sort that old portraits recognize as kin. He had the weary self-command of someone who has spent years managing difficulties by naming them privately and ignoring them publicly. "You've been in the passages," he said. "Yes." That was not necessary. "No," I said. "That is why it was useful." He disliked that, and admitted it by not pretending otherwise. I asked, "Who knew that panel beside the silver frame?" "The family, Mrs. Pell, some of the staff." Widwin Vale, his face shifted almost invisibly. "Not, I think, in detail." "That means no." "Yes." Number that was useful. A groom who does not know the hidden ways of the house is either not trusted or not observant. I already had a working opinion on Edwin's powers of observation, and it did not flatter him. "What about Lila?" I asked. "She knew them from childhood. She used them. Sometimes this house is full of routes for avoiding people one has been taught to receive. That sounds hereditary." He let it pass. As children, Lila and her brother treated the passages as adventure. Later, Lila used them when she wanted air without procession. "Last night?" "I don't know." "No," I said. "You don't." That landed because it was true in the most expensive possible way. A young woman vanishes from her own engagement, and the uncle is left with architecture and uncertainty. I brought up Evelyn March. For the first time, Adrian Harrow looked directly at me without the shield of manners. "Yes," he said, "she knew the house. Better than some of the family. That depends what you mean by no. I mean, could she move from east drawing room to back stair without opening the wrong panel?" "Yes." "And could she choose a place in the passage where a camera reflection would catch her without exposing her to the room?" He did not answer immediately. He did not need to. "Yes," he said. "There, not an intruder, not some random female grievance in a dark hat. Someone who knew where to go, how to stand, and what the house itself would do if properly addressed." I took the rest from the servants. Henry, the second footman, confirmed he had not seen the woman enter through the main hall. Clara, the maid, had seen no unknown guest pass the service corridor, but admitted that during the announcement half the lower staff were occupied with trays and coats. James, the butler, said only one useful thing all day, which was that Harrow House had been built by a man who trusted blood less than brick, and therefore made sure both had separate routes. That line belonged to Wolfe if anyone did, but I took it in trust. By late afternoon I had enough to bring home. Wolfe was in the office on West 35th with his beer, his chair, and the expression of a man who has spent the day allowing orchids to justify themselves, and now requires the same from humanity. I gave him the house in order, the concealed panel by the silver frame, the passage behind the east drawing room, the service corridor, the back stair, the library alcove opening, the older dressing room stair. The fact that a person could appear for the photograph and disappear again without ever joining the room directly. Mrs. Pell's certainty that the reflected woman had not drifted there. Adrian Harrow's confirmation that Evelyn March knew the house thoroughly from childhood and could have used the passages as if reading a remembered sentence. When I finished, Wolfe shut his eyes. "At last," he said. "The house admits its profession." That sounds severe. It is descriptive. Harrow House is not merely elegant, it is procedural. He opened one eye. The woman in the reflection was no intruder. She moved with inherited or acquired knowledge. That narrows the field decisively. It points to Evelyn March. Yes, or to anyone acting with her knowledge. Never be lazy, Archie. I fight it hourly. He ignored that. Also, Miss Harrow's disappearance now changes character. She did not vanish from a crowded room in the vulgar sense. She used, or was led through, the house's own invisible roots. Architecture became instrument. That sounds like you enjoy it. Top Fu, I dislike houses that collaborate. They encourage sentiment in policemen. He leaned back further, which in Wolf means the facts have settled into a shape he can already bully, but prefers to ripen another day. Tomorrow, he said, you will learn why Evelyn March was removed from that house, what claim she carried back with her, and whether Miss Harrow went into the passage willingly. We now know the reflected woman belonged to the house more than to the room. That distinction is vital. Later, at my window, with the city below looking wet, lit, and permanently unconvinced by romance, I thought about Harrow House, elegant rooms in front, concealed movements behind, public silver, private corridors. A family history conducted partly in direct speech and partly through walls. The woman in the reflection had stood where she did not, because she was clever in the moment, but because the place itself was an old sentence she knew how to read. This was not an intruder. It was someone who had come back by the route the house remembered best. Chapter 5. The groom who asked nothing. Edwin Vale appeared calm, controlled, and carefully concerned. He admitted Lila had been distant, but never pressed for answers. Their engagement had moved quickly, almost too smoothly. I saw a man invested in the outcome, not the truth, and silence often benefits the one who avoids questions. There are men who suffer visibly, and men who arrange suffering so that it does not disturb the furniture. Edwin Vale belonged to the second class. I do not say that as accusation. At that point I had not yet earned accusation. I say it as description, and in a case description is the only honest luxury. Wolf sent me back to Harrow House after lunch with the sort of instruction that sounds mild until you begin hearing the steel in it. Archie, the prospective husband, Widwin Vale. Yes, you suspect him. I distrust him, Wolf said. Suspicion is more expensive. Earn it properly. That sounds like work. It is also. A woman disappears from her engagement after recognizing a returning figure from the house's past, and her betrothed has contributed little beyond grooming and posture. I find that unsatisfactory. You object to posture. I object to insufficient curiosity. Go. So I went. Harrow House in the early afternoon looked like a woman who had received terrible news and decided not to show it below the collar. Everything was still in place. The flowers continued to bloom as if not one of them had ever heard the word scandal. The servants moved softly. The silver remembered its duties. Even the light through the tall front windows seemed to arrive with the proper caution for the neighborhood. Only the people had gone wrong. I found Edwin Vale in the library, which had by then become his headquarters for appearing burdened, without yielding specific information. He was standing by the mantel with one hand in his pocket and the other holding an unlit cigarette, as if he had been considering vice and found it too untidy for the hour. He turned when I came in and gave me the steady, reasonable look of a man who expects reason to favor him, because he has always been on speaking terms with his own reflection. Mr. Goodwin. Yes. I imagine you've come to ask the same questions again. Number, I've come to ask the ones you answered too smoothly last time. That landed well enough to earn me a second look, cooler and more exact. Edwin Vale was around 34, broad in the shoulders, well cut in the face, and one of those men whose clothes look less chosen than inevitable. Good hair, good hands, good voice, good schooling, and not enough visible wear anywhere to suggest life had inconvenienced him before this week. He had the kind of composure that wins confidence in banks and resentment in detectives, he said. Sit down then. I did. He remained standing another second, then changed his mind and took the chair across from me. That was useful. Men who need the height usually need it for a reason. I began where Wolf had wanted me to begin. Lila Harrow had been distant for weeks. Yes. You noticed. Yes. You asked no useful question. His jaw moved a little. That is your opinion. No, I said. That is arithmetic. A man engaged to a woman notices her going cold and does nothing but wait for the ceremony. That is either confidence, stupidity, or policy. He smiled then. But not because anything was funny. It was the smile of a man who has had his type named before and means to outlast the naming. You make it sound contemptible. I make it sound observable. He set the cigarette down on a tray without lighting it. Lila was under strain. There were family tensions, social obligations, arrangements. Yes, flowers, guests, silver, relatives. I've met all of them. I'm asking about Lila. He stopped, which was the first useful thing he'd done. She became less direct with me, he said, more guarded. When? 3 weeks ago, perhaps a little more. Before the engagement announcement or after? Before. That improved matters badly. Yet the engagement moved ahead. Yes, quickly. He gave me a level look. We had already agreed. That's not what I asked. Their engagement had indeed moved quickly. I had heard enough already from Nora Kent and Mrs. Van Alstyne to know that. Lila and Edwin had been publicly linked in whispers for months, formally engaged only recently, and then, all at once, the announcement dinner, the invitations, the flowers, the machinery. Too smooth. In New York, anything involving old money and real feeling should develop at least one visible bruise before the silver comes out. This one had glided, I said. Who hurried it? He answered carefully. No one hurried it. That is always what the one doing the hurrying says. He didn't like that, which made me keep going. Did Lila want to delay? She wanted less display. That isn't the same. No, he admitted, it isn't. There it was, a little crack, not in guilt perhaps, but in Polish. I widened it. Did her family want it settled? Favorable. I leaned back. That's a strong word for matrimony. It sounds like rail stock. He looked annoyed now, which was an improvement. Annoyance is more human than calm, and humans occasionally tell the truth by accident. We suited one another, he said. On paper, in life, that remains under review. He did not answer. Good. I shifted slightly and let the tone soften because sometimes a man will defend his own blindness more honestly if he thinks you are finally showing him some respect. When did you know something was wrong? I asked. He took longer with that, and when the answer came it was better. The night she received the second note, he said. Silence is useful when a man has just confessed the existence of something he hoped to manage himself. He understood and continued. She told me only that an old matter had come back. She said I was not to ask further and not to interfere. And you obeyed? Yes. Why? His face changed, just enough to prove he knew the answer would sound weak and hated that. Because she asked it, he said. And because I believed if I pressed, she would shut me out entirely. That at least was honest enough to be worth hearing. You were already outside, I told him. He let that pass because it was true, I asked. What did the note say? I never saw it. Number no, he repeated. A little sharper now. I saw her after she had read it. She was standing in the small conservatory off the breakfast room. She looked. He stopped. How? Not frightened, annoyed at first. Then settled. He frowned, as if some question she had kept postponing had finally answered itself. That matched Nora and improved him against my will. And you still asked nothing. He looked at me directly, Mr. Goodwin. Not every man believes inquiry is proof of devotion. No, I said. Some men believe possession is. That one struck cleanly enough to make his color rise. Not much. Enough. He stood again and walked to the window, where the grey light on the glass made him look older and less secure, which improved him further. You think I wanted the marriage more than the woman. I think you wanted the completed arrangement very badly, I said. Whether that included the woman as person or as central ornament remains under review. You are offensive. Yes, it saves decorative conversation. He turned back. Lila and I understood one another. No, I said. You understood what your life would look like with her in it. That was the sentence, and it stayed in the room a moment, because it had weight enough to deserve furniture, he said, more quietly. You have no idea what I felt for her. That is exactly my point. Neither, I think, did you. There are times when even a decent man will hate you for accuracy. Edwin Vale did, briefly. It showed, and then he put it away, which was also useful. Men who build their lives carefully do not welcome unexpected truths. They prefer scheduled revelations with invitations. I asked the practical next question. What did you stand to gain? He stared. Gain. Yes, don't look shocked. Rich families don't arrange themselves around emotion alone. There are always properties, trusts, obligations, expectations, correctives, dowries, reputations, all the usual furniture. What did the marriage settle? He gave me the standard answer first: mutual suitability, old family compatibility, long acquaintance, nothing mercenary, the usual polished rubbish. I waited. At last he said, there was a trust matter. There always is. Lila came into principal control of part of the Halloway estate structure upon marriage, or at 30, whichever came first. Which is when? Next year. That was something at last. And marriage to you would align that control with your branch. Yes, he said. In part. In part is all I need for now. He looked at me as though I had turned romance into bookkeeping. I had it, needed it. Did Lila know the terms? Yes. Did she like them? His mouth tightened. She disliked being discussed as if she were a hinge. She was right. That answer earned me another pause. The pauses were doing more work than his words. I changed angle. On the night of the engagement, after the photograph, she told you not to follow immediately if she left the room. Yes. And you obeyed because? I thought she needed a minute. You thought a woman who had just recognized someone from a threatening past needed privacy rather than witness. He turned from the window. I did not know that then. No, I said, because you kept choosing not to know. That was as close as I was willing to come then to an accusation. He had not asked because asking might have made the answer inconvenient, and silence often benefits the one who avoids questions. I left him and found Nora Kent in the little music room with another cigarette and the same exhausted intelligence. Well, he is composed, I said. Yes, too composed. Yes, he noticed her distance and pressed nothing. Nora gave me a bitter little smile. That is Edwin. He believes tact and passivity are cousins. Were they in his case? Number in his case they were a screen. There it was from the friend, and better because it had no need to flatter itself. He loved the outcome, Nora said. The house, the certainty, the corrected future. Lila in the middle of it, yes, but as if she were a signature on the settlement, rather than the argument. That's severe. No, she said. It's kind. I took that back to Wolf in the late afternoon, while Fritz rattled china in the dining room, and the brownstone settled around us in its usual air of order superior to the city's. Wolf heard me out without interruption, which meant he had already begun placing Edwin Vale among his mental furniture, according to weight and probable resale value. When I was done, he nodded once. Yes, you're getting lazy. Number, you are getting clearer. He lifted a finger. Edwin Vale observed distance, accepted notes, and failed to demand explanation. That is not innocence, Archie. It is insulation. That was my reading. Yes, he is invested in completion. Marriage, estate alignment, household settlement, future architecture. Such men believe questions are untidy, because answers may force redesign. I sat back, so he's not the reflected woman. Do not be childish. Of course he is not the reflected woman. That was wit. It failed also. Do not mistake passivity for harmlessness. A man may avoid the truth precisely because silence profits him. Miss Harrow's uncertainty served Vale so long as it did not interfere with the marriage date. That is morally unattractive and legally undecided. That was Wolf in one of his better moods, precise enough to bruise. He added, now find who did welcome the truth, or thought she did. Someone used the house's hidden ways, the frame's reflection, and Miss Harrow's recognition to bring matters to conclusion. Edwin Vale is too static for invention, but not too static for benefit. Keep him warm. Later, at my window, looking down at West 35th, with the rain beginning again in thin silver lines that made every cab look guiltier than usual, I thought about Edwin Vale, calm, controlled, carefully concerned. A man who could speak of love as if it were a properly managed estate and of a missing bride, as if some delay in the closing had inconvenienced him morally. He had noticed distance. He had never asked why. He had accepted silence because silence left the arrangement standing. That does not make a man a murderer, but it does make him very hard to pity when the truth finally arrives and refuses to knock. Chapter 6. The friend who saw too much. Nora Kent had noticed more than she first admitted. She saw Lila's unease, her glances, her quiet distraction. She also recognized the reflection sooner than others. I sensed she was holding something back. Not guilt, but a truth she wasn't ready to release. There are times in an inquiry when the liar is less trouble than the loyal friend. Liars, if properly handled, usually want something simple: safety, admiration, delay, or a better position in the story. A loyal friend wants something harder. She wants the truth spared long enough not to destroy the wrong person first. That makes her nobler, and, from my point of view, more annoying. By then Nora Kent was annoying me in exactly the right way. Wolf had sent me back to Harrow House after lunch, with a sentence that had all the charm of cold steel and most of the usefulness. Archie, Miss Kent, that narrows the field to one useful person. Yes, she has withheld something. You know that from one conversation. No, Wolf said. From your report of it, you are occasionally observant despite vanity. Miss Kent recognized the reflection sooner than others. She noticed Miss Harrow's unease before the fiancé did. Therefore she either sees more than average or has been living close to the trouble. In either case, she has not yet paid in full. That sounds commercial. It is moral, Wolf said, which is usually more expensive. So I went to collect the balance. The house on East 68th had settled into that strained quiet which follows scandal when the servants have stopped pretending nothing happened, and the family has not yet agreed what version of the truth will best survive luncheon. The flowers in the drawing rooms were beginning to look accusatory. The silver had kept its nerve. The people had not. Stebbins let me in and said, "Kramer had Miss Kent again this morning." That's kind of him. She must be thrilled. She wasn't. That's because Inspector Kramer asks questions the way some men swing clubs. Stebbins permitted himself half a smile. That is as near to extravagance as he ever gets on duty. "Music room," he said. I found Nora there, exactly where I had expected her, and perhaps where she had expected me. The little music room had 2 windows looking on the side garden, a grand piano, nobody had touched since the engagement announcement went sour, and chairs chosen for the comfort of listeners rather than players. Nora sat near the window with no cigarette this time, which meant either she had run out or the hour had grown too serious for smoke. Her hands were folded in her lap with more discipline than rest. She looked up. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes. You've come back because I failed to tell you the whole thing. That saves me a speech." She almost smiled, but not enough to count. "Sit down." I did. Nora Kent was one of those women whom men describe as clever because the vocabulary they require for accuracy is beyond them. She was more than clever. She was observant enough to suffer from it. Dark hair, clear skin, steady mouth and eyes that had been doing extra work for weeks. Her dress was simple and expensive in the right modest way, which told me she came from money respectable enough to avoid noise, but not enough to survive idiocy unscarred, I said. "You saw more than you told me." "Yes, because." She looked toward the piano, not at me, because naming a thing lets it begin. That's philosophical. I need chronology. That brought her eyes back. Good. It also brought the first faint color into her face, which meant I had stepped on the right stone. "All right," she said. Lila had been uneasy for longer than I first said. "How long?" "Since January. But in January it was scattered. By March it had shape." "What shape?" "Expectation." She gave the word carefully, as if testing whether it still belonged to her. At first I thought she was only unhappy about Edwin, then I thought it might be the house. Then I understood it was neither exactly. It was someone. Evelyn March. Nora's eyes narrowed. So you have that. Yes, I'm greedy. Continue. She let out a breath. Lila never used the name to me. Not at first. She would say, her or the woman, or once the omitted one, which is not a phrase any happy bride invents over coffee. I heard the name Evelyn only last week. That was good enough to improve my posture. From whom? From Lila. We were upstairs in her dressing room. She had one of those notes in her hand and was furious, because anger is easier than fear if you've been properly brought up, she said. If Evelyn March means to come back through the walls, instead of the front door, she might at least vary her stationery. I wrote that down at once. People never repeat their best lines under examination, and I intended to save this one from the common grave of memory. She showed you the note. Number she fed it to the fire before I crossed the room. What was on the envelope? Nothing useful. No return. No crest. No postmark. Hand-delivered. Did you ever see the handwriting? Only in passing, firm, old-fashioned. Too controlled for panic. That sounded like grievance with schooling. I asked. And you still said nothing? Yes. Why? This time the hesitation was not from uncertainty. It was from reluctance to hear herself answer. Because I thought I knew what it was about. All right, tell me. Nora's hands unclasped and clasped again. Lila once told me there are two kinds of family secret. The kind everyone knows and agrees not to say aloud, and the kind only the house knows. She said Evelyn March belonged to the second. That was good, too good to interrupt. She said when her mother was young there had been another girl in the house, half protected, half employed, never entirely one thing or the other. A girl who learned the passages, the stairwells, the rhythm of meals, the locked drawers, the places letters were left and removed. Someone useful enough to be kept close and inconvenient enough to be denied later. Evelyn, yes. And Lila thought she had come back. She thought she had been near for months. That settled more than one question. I leaned forward. Near how? Nora answered quietly. Things moved, not stolen. Repositioned, a hairbrush on the wrong side of a dressing table. A book put back where only an older servant would have shelved it. A childhood miniature left face down instead of upright. Once, the panel in the morning room not quite latched. Lila kept telling herself she was inventing patterns because houses like this train women to distrust their own direct thoughts. But by April she no longer believed it was nerves. There it was, not haunting, not melodrama. Pressure, someone inside the house's memory, had been laying fingers on old arrangements and letting Lila notice. She told no one, I asked. She told me. You know what I mean. Nora's mouth moved. Number not the family, she said. If she told Celia, the house would become strategy. If she told Edwin, it would become administration. If she told Adrian, it would become silence in better tailoring. That was Lila Harrow, whole in one sentence, I asked. And what did it become with you? Nora looked at me steadily, waiting. That at least was honest. You also recognized the reflection sooner than others. Yes. Why, because I was already looking for her. There it was, clean enough to sting. Since when? Since the first note in March. I let the silence do a little work then, because a friend who has finally stepped over the line from withholding into speech deserves 1 second in which not every word is made to earn its meal. At last I said, Nora, that is a long time to keep your mouth shut. Yes. Were you protecting Lila? Yes. From what? She looked down at her hands. From being forced into a choice before she had decided which loss she could live with. That improved the case badly. What choice? Whether to expose Evelyn March and whatever old claim came with her, or to let the engagement and all the house's arrangements roll over it until everything was buried again. Lila kept saying it wasn't only about a woman returning, It was about a place in the story no one had paid for, honestly. That sounded like money, inheritance, legitimacy, or all three sharing the same overcoat. I said, "You knew the reflection mattered at once." "Yes, before the others." "Yes, because Lila had already been telling you where to look." Nora nodded. "She said if Evelyn came, she would not knock at the center of the room. She would choose the edge and let the edge do the work." That was nearly enough to make me admire Evelyn March, which I resisted on moral grounds. I asked the question Wolf would have asked first, and without the politeness of my delay. Did Lila intend to leave with her? Nora's answer took longer. It hurt her to give it, which made it worth waiting for. "I don't know if leave is the right word," she said. "She intended to hear her, that much I know," Lila said once. "If the house has been lying for 20 years, I don't want to marry from inside the lie." That changed Edwin Vale from merely dull to structurally inappropriate. "And yet," I said, "you said nothing." Nora's eyes came back to me tired and hard. "Mr. Goodwin, do you know what happens in houses like this when truth arrives before the family is dressed for it? The wrong people seize it first. Men turn it into settlement language. Women turn it into blood accounting. Servants get blamed for knowing. I was trying to keep it long enough for Lila to use it herself. That was the whole answer. Not guilt, not stupidity. Protection misplaced perhaps. Dangerous, certainly. But protection." I asked one more. "Did you ever meet Evelyn March? See her before the photograph?" "Once, maybe 3 weeks ago in a shop window across from Lila's carriage. Or I thought I did. A face in the reflection. By the time I turned, it was gone." That suited the pattern too well to ignore. I rose then because I had enough for Wolf, and because another 5 minutes might have produced sympathy, which would only have made me clumsy. "At the door," I said. "Nora?" "Yes." "When you say Lila had already decided something, what do you mean?" She took her time. "I mean she had stopped hoping the past would remain behaved. She was waiting for the meeting. The engagement party only happened to be where it arrived." That stayed with me. Back at the brownstone, Wolf was in the office with his beer beside him and one of the fat directories open, though I doubt he had read a line. He does that sometimes. Keeps a book nearby the way a general keeps a map, not because he needs it in the instant, but because it improves the authority of the room. "Well," he said. I gave him Nora Kent whole, the unease since January, shaped by March, the name Evelyn March first spoken last week, the notes burned after reading, the small domestic disturbances in the house. Nora already watching the edges of rooms and reflections. Lila's phrases about omitted women and houses that know too much, and finally, Nora's reason for silence. Protection, not ignorance. When I was done, Wolf shut the directory. "Yes. You're very musical this week. You are finally bringing me facts that connect." He adjusted himself a fraction deeper into the chair, which meant approval without warmth, his usual gift. "Miss Kent has been withholding not from deception, but from loyalty and fear that improves her credibility while worsening the danger. Also, Miss Harrow had ceased to regard Evelyn March as possibility and begun to regard her as appointment." That was my reading. "Yes, which means the photograph did not create the crisis. It certified it." I sat down. "Nora thinks truth would have been seized by the wrong hands." "Of course it would," Wolf said. "That is why truth so often arrives late to rich houses. Wealth attracts interpreters." That sounds cynical. "It is taxonomy." He took up the photograph again and looked at the reflected woman. Miss Kent recognized the image because she had already been trained by Miss Harrow to expect a woman at the edge of the scene. "Good. That means our inquiry is no longer whether Evelyn March returned, but why she chose that night, that room, and that method, and whether Lila went willingly." Wolf grunted. "Do not overuse willingly. A woman may walk under moral coercion as obediently as under threat. Distinguish." That was fair, which I dislike in proportion to usefulness. He said, "Tomorrow you will learn what claim Evelyn March carried, what in Harrow House had been moved or disturbed, and why Miss Harrow believed marriage would bury a lie rather than resolve it. Latter, at the window with the city below, looking as if rain had been spread over it by a careful hand, I thought about Nora Kent. She had seen Lila's quiet distraction, the searching glances, the little signs that something in the house had begun answering an old call. She had recognized the reflected woman sooner than anyone else because she had already been waiting for her in the only place such women appear first, in the edges, the surfaces, the second look, and she had kept silent. Not because she knew nothing, because she knew enough to fear what the truth would do once it was out among people who called arrangement love and concealment good breeding. Chapter 7. The frame that spoke the photograph revealed more the longer it was studied. The woman in the reflection was focused only on Lila. She wasn't observing the room, she was waiting for a moment, her position aligned with a hidden door behind the wall. The reflection had been left as a message. By then the silver frame had ceased to be an object and become a witness. That is one of the misfortunes of old household things. They begin life as decoration, survive long enough to become tradition, and then one evening they catch a lie in the glass and spend the rest of the week testifying. Wolf sent me back to Harrow House with the photograph in an envelope and one of his sentences that sounds civilized until you try to obey it. Archie, stop thinking of the reflection as an accident preserved by chemistry. Think of it as speech. That sounds poetic. No, Wolf said. It sounds deliberate. The woman wished to say something without entering the room on its terms. Learn what? So I went to listen to Silver. The house had settled by then into a new phase of alarm. The first panic was over. The second had arrived. The kind where everyone begins understanding that the facts will not behave decorously, and that each hour of silence gives them a worse attitude. Stebbins let me in with the photograph already in mind because even policemen improve around visual evidence. You're back for the picture. No, I told him. I'm back for the sentence inside it. He shook his head. That sounds like Wolf. That's because it's cleverer than I usually allow myself before noon. The east drawing room was empty, which was perfect. A room talks most honestly when the family has gone elsewhere to improve their memories. The flowers from the engagement announcement were still there, but not with conviction. On the side tables, the silver had that tired brightness you see the morning after performance. The great framed portrait stood where Celia Brent had insisted it be moved, near the paneled wall with the concealed door, and the whole room waited with the special stillness of a stage after the wrong person has failed to return for the second act. I took the photograph out and matched it to the room again. Lila Harrow at center, Edwin Vale beside her, looking like a man who had already accepted congratulations for a life not yet safely delivered. Celia Brent and Adrian Harrow behind. Some peripheral guests soft at the edges. And then, in the silvered glass, the woman. The longer I looked, the worse it got for innocence. At first, the eye goes naturally to the fact of her. A woman present in reflection and absent from direct witness. After that, if you have the decency to distrust a first impression, you begin seeing her posture. She was not glancing about, not drifting, not startled into accidental capture. Her body angle, what little the reflection preserved of it, was entirely toward Lila. The head was turned only enough to fix attention, no interest in the room, none in Edwin, none in the guests. She was not observing an engagement, she was waiting for one person to see her that mattered more than her appearance. I put Roscoe Bell back in the camera position and had him settle the frame line as nearly as he could reconstruct it. He disliked the exercise because photographers resent learning that their art has been used by strangers without credit. About there, he said. No, I told him. About exactly there. He moved half an inch. He compared the image again. There it was. If Bell had stood a foot left, the woman would have vanished from the reflective field. A foot right, and she would have appeared badly, cut by glare and ornamental silvering. Where he had stood, she was preserved just enough to compel a second look, and no more. That meant she had not merely chosen the room. She had chosen Bell's line, or had watched him choose it and entered the reflected field only when the angle was fixed. She waited for you to settle, I said. Bell frowned. What? The camera. She didn't stand there all evening. She stood there when she knew what the frame would take. His face changed. You mean she used the picture? Yes, I said. That's becoming the general theory. He swallowed and looked at the silver frame with less professional warmth than before. Good. I prefer witnesses offended. I put Henry the footman back at the place where he had held his tray. From there the woman's actual standing point was almost invisible, blocked by the silver frame and a floral arrangement large enough to have its own politics, but in reflection, she was clean enough to remain. That was the trick. She had stood in the one place where the room could fail to notice her, and the photograph could not. The hidden door helped explain that. I had Mrs. Pell open the panel again and stood inside the concealed passage just beyond the seam. From there I could see exactly how the woman had done it. The panel opened an inch, then more. A person already familiar with the depth of the molding and the blind angle created by the frame could take one step out, no farther, and hold the silver glass would catch her. The room, still oriented toward the central pair, would not. Then when the exposure was made, she had only to withdraw and the house swallowed her again. Not an entrance, a declaration. Celia Brent came in while I was measuring the line from passage to frame. She took one look at me standing partly inside her wall and said, "Must you crawl through the family disgrace physically as well as conversationally? It improves the acoustics." She came no farther. Smart woman, there are moments when a room is more honest if left mostly to its conspirators. I held up the photograph. Mrs. Brent, the woman in this reflection, is not merely present. She is addressing Lila. Her eyes sharpened on the print. How do you know? Because she is looking only at Lila, not the group, not the camera, not the room. She is not witnessing the event. She is interrupting it. Celia Brent said nothing for a second. Then, that is worse. Yes. Why leave herself in the photograph at all? Because spoken appearances can be denied, reflected ones survive. I had her stand where Lila had stood. Then I took my place where the reflected woman had been and watched Celia's face as she looked toward me. There it was, even without surprise, the odd force of being summoned by a presence placed just outside the room's declared order. Not close enough to claim social standing, not far enough to be ignored by the right eyes. Lila would have seen her. Lila had seen her. And once she did, the rest of the room became secondary. Celia Brent said quietly, "My niece noticed first." Yes, and the woman knew she would. Yes, that was the central fact now. The reflection was not left for the police, or for Kramer, or even for Wolf. It was left first for Lila. The photograph only ensured that if Lila could not, or would not speak afterward, the moment would still exist independently of her. I found Nora Kent in the morning room and put it to her. She took the photograph, looked at it a long time, and then handed it back with greater care than most people give a confession. She wanted Lila to know there would be no pretending later, Nora said. That's close to my view. She was saying, "You see me. And now the room will have to too, if anyone bothers to look properly." That was Nora at her best. Clear and a little cruel, which is how intelligence behaves when tired. I asked, "Did Lila ever speak of being forced to witness something?" Nora nodded. "Aunts," she said, "in this house the ugliest truths are never announced at the center. They are placed at the edge and left for the one person who cannot survive by missing them." Back at the brownstone, Wolf was in the office with one of the big yellow roses from the plant rooms, standing in a bowl nearby because Fritz had decided homicide could be improved by color. He took the photograph, studied it under the lamp, and then looked at me. Well, I gave it to him whole, the woman's posture, her singular focus on Lila, Belle's camera line, the alignment with the hidden door, the proof that she had waited for the right angle and stepped into it only when the frame would preserve her. Celia Brent's reaction, Nora Kent's interpretation, the growing certainty that the reflection was not accident, not flourish, but message. When I finished, Wolf grunted. "Good. You could diversify. Number, you could improve faster." He lowered the print to the blotter. "The woman in the reflection is not observing. She is claiming a moment of acknowledgement." The message is this: you see me now, and what sees me with you will remember. That's neatly vicious. Yes, Wolf said. It is also intelligent. She required Lila's recognition first, and posterity's second. Therefore, the reflection is both summons and insurance. I sat down. Meaning. Meaning Miss Harrow did not simply notice a woman. She received notice. Also, the hidden door now becomes more than route. It becomes authorship. Only someone familiar with the house's concealed geography could have composed that visual statement. Evelyn March. Perhaps, or someone acting in her history. Do not become sentimental about names, Archie. That is Wolf's way of stopping me from enjoying a theory before it has paid rent. He touched the edge of the photograph once with a fingertip. Truth rarely enters rich houses by the front door. It prefers side angles, old service routes, and objects mistaken for decoration. This frame spoke because the family trusted it as furniture. That sounds like one for your memoirs. Later, at my window, while the rain thinned over West 35th and the headlights on the street below dragged themselves through it like tired confessions, I thought again about the silver frame. The woman inside it had not wanted the room. She had wanted the exact second before the room changed. She had waited for Belle to settle, for Lila to stand, for the hidden door to give her just enough of the house to remain half absent and entirely present. The reflection had not preserved mystery. It had preserved intent, and that meant someone in Harrow House was no longer asking to be let back into the story. She was already writing herself into it. Chapter 8. The name that was removed the Harrow family history revealed a missing name. A woman once connected to Lila's father had been erased from records. Her existence was denied, her story buried. The silver frame had once held her photograph. Now it reflected her return. By then the case had stopped pretending to be about a vanished fiancé and admitted what it had been all along. A family history trying to collect interest. Wolf reached that conclusion before I did, which annoyed me only because he had earned it from a chair. He was in the office with beer on the desk, the photograph under his lamp, and one eye on a file drawer he had made me open and close 3 times in 10 minutes while he arranged my afternoon for me. Archie, he said, we have a woman in reflection, an old house with concealed passages, a bride who recognizes before she vanishes, and a family determined to make the past pay rent only in silence. Therefore, the past concerns blood. That's cheerful. It is repetitive. Find the removed name. That sounds like genealogy with better lighting. It is theft, Wolf said. Names are stolen from records more often than diamonds are stolen from cases, because paper protests less. Go. So I went to Harrow House to inquire into its dead with the living still trying to behave. Harrow House had gone beyond alarm by then, and entered that colder condition where everyone understands that facts are now being exhumed indoors. The staff had grown quieter, the family more mannered. Even the flowers had begun to look as if they regretted being sent. Mrs. Pell received me in the small morning room, and after one look at my face, spared us both preliminaries. You've come for the old records. Yes, and the old lie. That too, if it's indexed. She gave me one of her better glances. You are not as amusing as you think. Number, I'm more durable. She took me to the upstairs sitting room that had once belonged to Lila's mother. It was pale, careful, and underused, with books no one had opened recently, and photographs arranged in the way families arrange memory when they want it decorative and obedient. On the writing desk stood 2 silver frames, one occupied by a portrait of Lila at 16, with a riding crop, and too much certainty, the other holding only a newer studio print of Adrian Harrow and his late wife. The frame itself caught my eye before the picture did. Heavy silver oval, laurel edge. One small bruise near the lower right corner where polishing had failed to conceal an older knock. A frame built not merely to display but to persist. I had seen its twin before. In the east drawing room, where the reflected woman had placed herself in the glass of a larger companion piece like a signature returned to a contract. He said, this one had another photograph. Mrs. Pell did not answer at once. That was answer enough. Yes, she said at last. Of whom? She looked at the empty silver around Adrian's current portrait, then away, of a young woman. Name. You have it already. Evelyn March. Yes. That settled with the room like a bad inheritance. I touched the frame edge. When? It stood here for 3 years. Then it was removed. By whom? Mrs. Harrow herself, Lila's mother. Why? Mrs. Pell gave me the plain answer because by then the case had exhausted all decorative language in the house and left only the useful words behind. Because the girl had become inconvenient. There it was, I asked. What was Evelyn March to the family? The housekeeper's mouth tightened. She had served the house long enough to understand the price of truth, and had decided, perhaps too late for her own comfort, that the bill would be paid one way or another. Evelyn March was the daughter of Hannah March, who came here as companion and seamstress when Mrs. Harrow was newly married. Hannah was respectable enough to enter by the front of the service hall and poor enough to stay grateful. She had a child. The child was kept near, educated in scraps, used in errands, tolerated in rooms when convenient, then less tolerated. Father. She looked at me levelly. You know the answer. Yes, I said. I want yours. Mrs. Pell folded her hands. Lila's father. That changed nothing and settled everything. A woman once connected to Lila's father had not merely been erased from the family record. She had been cut from it after first being half admitted. That is the sort of cruelty old houses practice best. Provisional recognition followed by archival murder. I asked. Was she acknowledged? Number privately. In allowances, in schooling. In the way doors were open to her some days and closed on others. Was Lila told? Not in a sentence. Children in houses like this are never told. They are allowed to absorb. That was exactly right. I asked for papers. Mrs. Pell took me to a locked cabinet in the upstairs linen room because old houses believe the best place to hide moral damage is near folded sheets. There, behind insurance packets and dull trust correspondence, were copies of birth notations, household accounts, a dismissed governess's letters, and one family register with a gap too clean to be innocent. Names entered in brown ink for births, marriages, deaths, departures. Then a line where another entry had once been cut out with a blade, not crossed out, removed. Who did that? I asked. Mrs. Harrow, Mrs. Pell said. After Hannah, March left the house. She left willingly. Number how? Under disgrace. That's family speech. It is accurate family speech. I kept pressing. What disgrace? Mrs. Pell drew a breath. The girl Evelyn had begun to resemble her father too much, and at an age when resemblance becomes social. Mrs. Harrow could endure charity. She could not endure resemblance. That was vicious enough to satisfy any historian, and disgust enough for me. In another packet I found an old photographer's receipt, dated 16 years earlier, for 2 silver portrait settings and 1 enlargement. Attached to it by a rusted pin was a notation in Lila's mother's hand, remove the smaller one from the blue room. Beneath that, in later pencil, another hand had written, stored East Attic chest. That improved my afternoon at once. I found the chest in the East Attic under steamer rugs, abandoned tennis rackets, and a broken lampshade that had outlived its style by malice alone. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue, was the missing photograph. Evelyn March, at about 17, dark-eyed, straight, back too direct for comfort, and unmistakably kin to Lila Harrow around the mouth, and brow if one knew where to look, and had enough honesty left to permit looking. The same silver oval frame mark fit the bruise on the downstairs twin perfectly. The silver frame in Lila's mother's room had indeed once held Evelyn's picture. I sat there on the attic floor with the tissue paper in my hand, and the dead house breathing around me in old beams and stored dust, and understood at last why the reflected woman had chosen silver. She had once been in the frame. Now she had returned in reflection, not merely to haunt, to correct. That was the point. The message in the glass had not been, I am here. It had been, you removed the name, not the claim. I took the photograph downstairs to Adrian Harrow. He received it in the library with the look of a man who had expected some bad thing, and found, Instead, the exact bad thing. That is always worse. You found it. Yes. He did not touch the picture at first. Where? Attic chest, east side, under cowardice and moths. He ignored that, because he had no strength to spare on my manners. She shouldn't have kept that, he said. Your sister-in-law. Yes. She removed the girl from the register too. His eyes closed once. I know. Did Lila know? She knew enough to ask the wrong questions in the right rooms by the age of 14. That sounds hereditary too. He looked at Evelyn's photograph then. Fully, she wanted recognition. No, I said. By then she wanted correction. Recognition was 20 years late. That landed. I found Nora Kent next, because if a friend has been keeping silence, it helps to show her the object the silence was trying to protect or postpone. She took one look at Evelyn's photograph and said, very softly, so that's why Lila hated the blue room. I looked up. Go on, she said once the room smiled falsely. I thought she meant the portrait arrangement. She meant this. She knew some face had been removed, and something of it remained in the silver. That was the kind of fact rich houses create accidentally and children keep forever. By the time I got back to West 35th with the cut register line, the attic photograph, the photographer's receipt, and the full ugliness of the removal, dusk had begun laying itself across the city in long grey bars. Wolf was in the office with the lamp on and Fritz somewhere beyond performing acts of culinary mercy on a pheasant. I laid the photograph of Evelyn March on Wolf's desk. He looked at it for a full minute. Then he said, yes, that word is growing on me against my will. He ignored it. The removed name is not merely genealogical embarrassment, it is motive with years to harden. A daughter of the house in blood, refused in record, half acknowledged in maintenance, and then excised. The silver frame once held her photograph. Now the same silver preserves her return in reflection. Excellent. That's a cold word. It is accurate, Wolf said. Accuracy is often cold. Continue. So I did. Hannah March, seamstress, companion, Evelyn raised near the family, then removed, the register line cut out, the silver frame reassigned. Lila's mother unable to endure resemblance attic storage. Lila learning enough to understand omission without ever being handed the proper sentence. When I finished, Wolf leaned back. At last, he said, the reflection speaks plainly. The woman in the photograph is claiming not entry but restoration. She was once in the frame, literally. Now she re-enters it. Symbolically, very neat. That sounds like admiration. Number it is diagnosis. Also, Miss Harrow's response now improves. She did not merely recognize a woman, she recognized an old theft returned. I sat down. And the disappearance? Wolf tapped the old photograph once. Miss Harrow vanished because the erased name had become unerasable. She could not proceed with engagement, house, trust, future, any of it, until the omission had been answered. Whether she went willingly, unwillingly, or under moral compulsion, remains to be settled. But now we know what called her. Latter, at the window with the street below, shining under lamps and the first night traffic, I thought about the silver frame in Lila's mother's room, an object meant to remember, repurposed to forget. A young woman's image removed because she resembled the wrong man in the wrong house, a register cut, a history buried. And years later, on an engagement night built for display and continuity, the same kind of silver catching her return in reflection. Families like the Harrows think if they remove the name, they have removed the person. But names are only the polite version of memory. And memory, when it has waited long enough, learns to come back through the glass. Chapter 9. The woman who came back, the reflected figure, was not a stranger, but someone long forgotten. She had returned to confront what had been hidden. Lila recognized her and understood what it meant. Their meeting was not forced. It was inevitable. And Lila chose to follow the truth rather than remain. By then the case had stopped pretending to be about disappearance and admitted that it was about return. That is one of the less pleasant habits of old scandals. They do not come back at the front door calling themselves scandal. They come back as correction, a removed name, A face in a reflection, a panel not quite latched. A note that says only enough to wake a memory. Then, when everyone has nearly managed to call it nerves, they stand where the house remembers them and wait. Wolf had reached that point ahead of me, which I resented only in the way one resents weather, uselessly and with some admiration. He was in the office on West 35th, with the old photograph of Evelyn March on his desk beside the engagement print, the two silver, bound histories staring at each other under the lamp like unwilling relatives at a funeral. Fritz had improved the room with coffee and left us to our more perishable occupations. "Well?" I said. Wolf looked from one photograph to the other. The reflected woman is no longer a problem of identity. She is Evelyn March, or someone acting for her with access to her face and grievance. We now require sequence. That is your polite word for trouble. It is my word for order. He touched the engagement print. Miss Harrow recognized the woman before the room did. Then Miss Harrow vanished. Therefore the meeting itself matters more than the image. Go learn whether it was coercion, summons, or invitation answered. That sounds like 3 ways to spell the same regret. "Yes," Wolf said. "Take care not to confuse them." So I went to learn how one woman follows truth out of a room full of witnesses and into the part of the house that doesn't ask permission. Harrow House had grown quieter by then, which made it more honest. Panic had been spent. The family had moved on to calculation, and the staff to that strained patience, which means they already know the house is going to be discussed by people who will pronounce its secrets wrongly. Stebbins was in the front hall with a notebook and a face that suggested Kramer had lately improved his mood by absence. "Nora Kent is still here," he said. "That saves me a trip. She says she's going home in an hour whether the Harrows collapse or not. That improves her as a character." I found Nora in the blue sitting room, which had begun to look as though it regretted ever having been elegant. She stood by the mantel, not smoking for once, with both hands on the back of a chair as if steadiness had become a practical matter. "You know who it is," she said before I could begin. "Yes, Evelyn March." "Yes." Nora closed her eyes briefly, not surprise then confirmation. "I thought so." "No," I said. "You hoped it. There's a difference." She gave me a tired look. "You are very proud of distinctions." "They pay my rent. Sit down." She sat, and I remained standing a moment because sometimes altitude helps when the truth has already begun bargaining. "Lila told you enough," I said. "Not all, but enough. Now you're going to tell me the part you've been keeping out of loyalty." Nora's mouth moved. "Loyalty is getting expensive." "It always does." She looked toward the window. The week before the engagement announcement, Lila asked me whether I believed a person could be missing from the family record and still have a stronger claim on the house than the people living in it. That was not casual conversation. Nothing with Lila had been casual for a month. Nora took a breath. I asked if she meant Evelyn. She didn't answer directly. She only said, "If she comes back, it won't be for money first. It will be for placement." That was good enough to stop me from moving. Placement. Yes. In the family. In the story, Nora said. Lila cared more about that. She thought the money had distorted everyone already. What frightened her was not loss of property. It was discovering that the house had been built around a lie and asking her to marry from inside it. There was Lila Harrow whole again in a sentence, not sentimental, not brave in the theatrical way, but unable finally to tolerate the wrong architecture. He asked, did she intend to meet Evelyn? Nora looked up. Yes, before the party, yes. Then why the engagement at all? Nora gave a small, bitter laugh. Because this house never stops just because the truth is coming. That one belonged in bronze. She thought Evelyn might not appear, Nora said. Or might write once more, and then go silent. Lila said, if she delayed the engagement without explanation, Celia would turn the whole thing into management, and Adrian into legal weather, and Edwin into a patient speech about strain. She wanted proof first, something she could not be argued out of. The reflection. Yes, so when she saw Evelyn in the silver frame, she knew. There it was, not fear recognition, And behind recognition, decision. I left Nora and went looking for the exact path of that decision. Henry the footman had improved with repetition. By the third interview, a good servant begins to understand that accuracy is less dangerous than revision. I took him back to the east drawing room and walked him through the minutes after the photograph. Miss Harrow spoke to Mr. Vale, I said. Yes, sir. Then she turned toward the morning room. Alone. At first, sir. At first is useful. Improve it. He swallowed. I think she expected someone there. You think? Yes, sir. She didn't go as if escaping. She went as if joining. That matched too much to ignore. Did anyone follow? Not at once. Mr. Vale was stopped by Mrs. Van Alstyne, and Mr. Benson asked him something. Miss Kent moved once as if to go after Miss Harrow, then stayed. That was Nora obeying the note, or the instinct, or both. And the reflected woman. Henry hesitated. Gone, sir, or gone from where I could have seen her. Yes, because she had never really been in the room, only at its edge. I went through the concealed panel, and along the passage again, in daylight, and under inquiry it had lost some of its ghostliness, and become what it truly was, a practical old domestic artery, carpet runner, discreet lamps, narrow turns, an arrangement built so that one class might remain efficient and another class remain unbothered by seeing efficiency in motion. Old wealth always calls its compromises practical. From the east panel to the morning, room opening took less than 15 seconds, if one knew the path. From there the back stair was another 10. The side terrace door, if unlatched earlier, less than a minute. A meeting could have happened there without noise, without confusion, without forcing Lila to commit herself in front of the room. The house had offered them privacy because it had been trained to do exactly that for exactly the wrong reasons. Mrs. Pell helped more than she probably intended. Miss Lila knew that route better than the front stair, she said. As a child she used it to avoid music lessons, at 16 to avoid callers, at 20 to avoid one particularly tiresome cousin from Hartford. Did she use it last night? Mrs. Pell held my gaze. I think she meant to. Because she had arranged to? Number, she shook her head. Because once she saw the woman in the frame, she knew where the meeting would be. It was the only place in the house where a returned person could stand without being instantly turned into a family scene. That was exactly right. I found Adrian Harrow next because once a case becomes inevitable, uncles begin looking more historical than paternal. He was in the library with one of the old account books open and unread before him. You know what happened? I said. He looked up. Number, I know, only that my niece is gone and the past has become vulgar. That's not knowledge, it's class distress. His mouth tightened. You are intolerable. Yes, it's my strongest credential. Did Lila know the truth about Evelyn? He considered lying, then saved us both the labor. She knew enough. How much? That Evelyn was her father's daughter by Hannah March, that the child had been half kept, half hidden, then removed when the resemblance became impossible to explain away politely, that the silver frame in the blue room had once held Evelyn's portrait, that her mother had destroyed the register entry rather than endure the contradiction in ink. There it was, bald and expensive. And last night, Adrian Harrow's fingers rested on the open book, but did not move. Last night she looked at the frame and knew Evelyn had chosen not merely to return, but to do it publicly enough that denial would become labor. Yes, he looked down. Lila had told me once, in one of her more unkind moods, that if Evelyn ever came back, she herself would have to decide whether to be a daughter of this house or a witness against it. That was better than anything he had said before, probably because it had once wounded him and still did. I asked, which did she choose? He met my eyes. You know, yes. She chose to follow the truth rather than remain. I took that back to Wolf in the late afternoon. The brownstone was at its best hour, quiet, lit warmly enough to suggest order rather than drama, with the plant rooms above exhaling their expensive dampness, and Fritz somewhere beyond the office making preparations that would improve all philosophy. Wolf sat behind his desk with the 2 photographs, still before him like paired exhibits in human evasion. "Well," he said, "I gave it to him in order. Nora's account that Lila had expected a meeting, wanted proof first, and cared less for money than for placement in the family story. Henry's statement that she went toward the morning room, not as if fleeing, but as if joining, Mrs. Pell's certainty that once Lila saw Evelyn in the frame, she would know exactly which route the meeting required. Adrian's admission that Lila had long understood. She might one day have to choose between inheritance and witness. When I finished, Wolf grunted softly. "Yes, you're very attached to that." "Number, I am attached to clarity." He looked from the old photograph of Evelyn to the reflected figure in the engagement print. The woman who came back is not an intruder, but a correction. Miss Harrow recognized her and understood that the time for postponement had ended. That matches. Yes, therefore their meeting was not forced in the melodramatic sense. It was inevitable. Miss Harrow had already been moving toward it internally. The reflection only fixed the hour. I sat down, then she went willingly. Wolf shook his head once. "Do not cheapen the word. She went by decision under moral compulsion. That is not the same as free ease. She followed because to remain would have meant endorsing a lie with marriage, wealth, and future that she would not do." That was Wolf when he was being both exact and unexpectedly generous to the absent. He touched the engagement print with one finger. "The woman in the reflection is saying, not merely I am here, but you know now that I am owed place." Miss Harrow followed the truth because she had already ceased belonging entirely to the arrangement around her. Good, good. Yes. For us, it means she is less likely dead, and more likely hidden, persuaded or participating in some further act of revelation. We are still behind the event, Archie, but not by much. That was almost comfort. I took it before he changed his mind. Later, at my window with the city below, carrying light through wet streets like a patient vice, I thought about Evelyn March, not a stranger, not a ghost, not even really a returned woman in the sentimental sense. She was a removed name, a rearranged face, a daughter cut from record and silver alike, until the family could behave as if a mission were the same thing as innocence. Then she had come back. Lila saw her and understood what it meant, not in melodrama, but in arithmetic. Whatever marriage, trust, house and future had been preparing around her could not proceed without first answering the woman who had been edited out of the story and had learned to return through reflection. Their meeting was not forced. That would have made it easier. It was inevitable. Chapter 10. The bride who left the frame. The photograph revealed the moment everything changed. Lila stepped away from the life prepared for her. The reflection was not a threat, but an invitation. I uncovered the past, but not every ending returns the missing. Because on Riddle Street, some people don't disappear. They finally choose where they belong. When a case reaches its end with everyone still indoors, and no body on a rug, people grow disappointed in different ways. Policemen dislike it because handcuffs prefer simpler grammar. Families dislike it because the truth remains alive enough to speak back. And clients dislike it because they come to Nero Wolfe wanting restoration and receive correction, which is a rougher gift and rarely returnable. By 5:30 that afternoon, the office on West 35th held all the right ingredients. Wolfe behind his desk in the chair that has heard more confessions than most chapels. Inspector Kramer standing where he could complain efficiently. Adrian Harrow in the red leather chair, looking as if ants had at last become heavier than upholstery. Celia Brent upright, and severe enough to suggest black marble. Edwin Vale composed by force, and therefore less composed than he thought. Nora Kent very still. Mrs. Pell in a chair she had not wanted, and occupied only because Wolfe had asked, which in her case counted as duty, and Roscoe Bell near the door, with the humility of a man who had taken one photograph, and found himself unable to leave its consequences. Fritz had served coffee because civilization deserves ritual, even when family history is being disassembled. The two photographs lay on Wolfe's desk. The old silver-framed portrait of Evelyn March at 17, recovered from the attic chest, and the engagement print with Evelyn's reflected return in glass. They looked at one another across the blotter like two versions of the same argument, one suppressed, one resumed. Kramer had already used up his first impatience. "Well," he said, "are we going to talk or worship paper?" Wolf opened his eyes fully, which was his way of announcing that worship was for other men. "We are going to conclude," he said. "Try not to interfere merely because you are vertical." That improved Kramer's color, not his mood. Wolf put one broad finger on the old photograph of Evelyn March. "This woman existed," he said. "That may seem a trivial statement, but the Harrow family has devoted years of energy, silver, storage, and edited records to disputing it decorously. Evelyn March was the daughter of Hannah March and of Lawrence Harrow, Lila Harrow's father. She was kept near the house, while inconveniently young, removed when resemblance became socially expensive, and thereafter denied in the formal record while still haunting it materially. Her portrait was removed from its silver frame. Her register entry was cut. Her name was not extinguished, merely displaced. No one interrupted, because the facts by then had earned a kind of silence better than manners. Wolf moved his finger to the engagement print. On the night of Miss Harrow's engagement announcement, the same silver, if not the identical frame, then, its companion, preserved Evelyn March's return in reflection. She placed herself not in the room's public order, but at its edge, where only Miss Harrow and any sufficiently suspicious later observer could not fail to see her. This was not intrusion. It was communication. Nora Kent looked down. Adrian Harrow looked at nothing. Celia Brent maintained her posture through sheer policy. Wolf continued. By then Miss Harrow had already been receiving notes. Miss Kent knew of them partially. Mr. Vale knew of them insufficiently. Mrs. Pell knew the house was restless. The family history had begun, at last, to collect itself against the family's preference. When Evelyn appeared in the reflection, Miss Harrow recognized her. More important, she understood that the time for postponement had ended. Widwin Vale spoke then, because men like him always wait until the word postponement appears before realizing they have been named. "You make it sound as if she planned to walk out on her own engagement." Wolf turned his head slightly. "Mr. Vale, you are dull. I do not say stupid, dull. You believed Miss Harrow's uncertainty to be temperamental weather and the engagement to be a structure that would outlast it. You mistook delay for compliance. That is common in men who value the completed arrangement more than the woman inside it." Widwin's jaw tightened. He did not answer because, for once, he had the decency to hear himself in the sentence. Wolf went on. Miss Harrow did not vanish in panic. She stepped away by decision. The hidden passage beside the east drawing room, known to her from childhood, and to Evelyn March from an even more complicated upbringing in that house, offered the proper route. Not because it was romantic, because it permitted one truth to leave the room without becoming a spectacle before it had words, Kramer said. "You're telling me she left willingly?" Wolf gave him a glance, suitable for a man who has just mishandled cutlery. "I am telling you," he said. "That willingness is too crude a word for moral decision under familial coercion." Miss Harrow saw Evelyn in the reflection, and knew that if she remained in the room, smiled through the toasts, and married Mr. Vale as arranged, she would be endorsing not merely a marriage, but an erasure that she would not do. Therefore she left. Kramer grunted. "Where is she?" "That," Wolf said, "is the least interesting part, though you will have it, Archie." That was my cue. I had already earned it the expensive way. "Yes, tell them." So I did. After leaving Harrow House from Wolf's office, I had not gone directly to dinner or virtue. I had gone downtown, then uptown again, then west, following the one route that had begun appearing too often in notes, recollections, and Evelyn's old connections to remain decorative. Hannah March's sister had once run a boarding house on Riddle Street. One of those narrow old buildings that survive by taking in women who need two things, discretion and a second sentence. The house was long gone as a boarding house, but the current owner remembered enough when shown old names and newer money. A woman matching Evelyn's age had been leasing the back rooms for 6 months under another name. 2 nights ago, a younger woman arrived with her, dark-haired, elegant even in a plain coat, no luggage worth boasting of, no police invited. Lila Harrow was not dead. She was on Riddle Street, in rooms paid for in cash, with Evelyn March and a lawyer named Simon Keene, who had spent the last 3 weeks preparing affidavits, copies of the cut register, and a civil petition that would make the Harrows' internal arrangements look less like prudence and more like what they were. I gave that to the room in the plainest terms. Celia Brent closed her eyes once. Adrian Harrow's shoulders dropped by perhaps an inch, which in an old family counts as collapse. Edwin Vale's face did something I had almost believed it incapable of doing. It registered not only loss, but incomprehension. "She's hiding," he said. "No," I told him, "she's positioned." That was one of my better lines, and I kept my face straight enough not to spoil it. Wolf resumed, as if I had merely placed a card in a game he had already been winning. "Miss Harrow left the engagement because Evelyn March returned not as menace, but as correction." Nora Kent looked up then and asked the question no one else in the room wanted, because they all already feared the answer. To what? Wolf's eyes went to the old photograph of Evelyn March. "To truth first," he said. "After that, perhaps to scandal, perhaps to litigation, perhaps to the tedious business of making names match lives. But first to truth. Miss Harrow understood what none of you permitted yourselves to understand in time, that a life prepared on top of an omission remains omission. One may marry from inside such a lie. Yes, people do it every day and call it good breeding." Miss Harrow declined. There it was, the ending if anyone in the room had been moral enough to want one. Kramer naturally wanted handcuffs instead. "So nobody kidnapped her," he said. "Number she leaves of her own accord, writes no note. Lets the house turn upside down, and that's supposed to satisfy me." "No," Wolf said. "Nothing satisfies you. But facts may still inconvenience you productively. There is no crime in leaving an engagement, Inspector. There are possible civil offenses in the handling of trusts and records, but your appetite lies elsewhere. Suppress it." That was one of Wolf's better public slaps, all the more effective for being grammatically complete. Edwin Vale stood up. "She owed me a word," he said. It was the first truly personal thing he had said in my hearing. Unfortunately for him, it was also the wrong one. Wolf looked at him. "No, Mr. Vale. She owed you attention, perhaps, while she intended to marry you. She did not owe you complicity after she ceased intending it. Your error was not wickedness, but entitlement softened by good manners. It is a common enough male disease." Edwin colored then. Properly. Human at last, though too late to help. Celia Brent said, very low, "Could she not have come to me?" Nora Kent answered before Wolf, "Or I could." And because it came from the friend, it landed harder. She knew exactly what would happen if she did. Celia's mouth tightened. She did not deny it. Adrian Harrow spoke next. And if I live another 10 years, I may still remember the sound of it, because it was the first unarmored sentence I heard from him. "Will she come back?" Wolf answered with more patience than Adrian had any reason to expect. "That depends what you mean by back. To this house, perhaps not soon. To the family record, certainly. To the law, almost at once, if Mr. Keene is as competent as Archie found him. To you personally, if you are fortunate and less stupid than your generation has so far managed to be." That settled the room more than any comfort would have. Kramer wanted the address on Riddle Street, so I gave it to him, along with the friendly advice that if he frightened Lila Harrow into lawyers before statements, he could spend the rest of the week admiring his own badge in civil court. He growled, which from Kramer means he knows he's been told the truth, but dislikes the tone. When at last they had all gone, Kramer pounding out toward his car, Edwin Vale stiff with damaged arrangements, Adrian Harrow quieter than before, Celia Brent carrying her pearls like a sentence, Nora Kent looking tired enough to sleep for 2 days. Mrs. Pell relieved only in the practical way. Decent housekeepers are relieved when a house has at least stopped inventing new forms of discomfort. The office grew still again. Fritz entered almost immediately because timing is one of the few forms of benevolent tyranny I respect, without reserve. Wolf looked at him. "What?" "Dinner," Fritz repeated. "The pheasant has reached that point beyond which inquiry becomes vandalism." We went to the dining room. That is another thing about Wolf. He will conclude a family history with surgery, and then sit down to pheasant with proper respect for source. Because to him civilization is not the absence of horror, but the insistence that horror does not excuse bad timing in the kitchen. Afterward, with coffee in the office and the city outside, washed clean enough to show its dirt, honestly, I said, "You knew she wasn't dead." Wolf snorted. "I knew nothing of the sort. I preferred it. Dead women do not arrange legal counsel on Riddle Street. It belongs in your notebook if you insist on keeping one." I went to the window. West 35th was glistening under the lamps. Taxi lights slid over the wet street. Somewhere downtown Kramer was probably making a face at a lawyer, and somewhere on Riddle Street, Lila Harrow was sitting in a room smaller and truer than any room in Harrow House, facing Evelyn March at last without silver, reflection, or family arrangement between them. The photograph had revealed the moment everything changed. Yes, but not because it proved a crime, because it preserved a choice. Lila had stepped away from the life prepared for her, not from romance only, or from Edwin Vale, or from one evening's parade of polite greed, but from the whole false continuity the house expected her to perform. The reflection had not threatened her. It had offered her another position in the story, not bride at center, smiling for inheritance and applause, but witness stepping out of the frame made for her. A lesser detective might have wanted the missing girl returned for symmetry, because in houses like Harrow House, and in every old quarter where families keep their own ledgers in silence and stairways, not everyone who disappears is lost. Some people simply stop standing where they were placed and at last choose where they belong.